Coming up on Network Africa. Senegal's President Macky Sall confirms the date of departure from office, says his decision is firm. Trade unions in Guinea suspend nationwide strike in response to press union leaders' release. Plus, the ICC orders reparations for victims of Ugandan rebel chief Dominic Ongwen. And welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin in Chad, where the state prosecutors say a prominent opposition leader has been killed during a shootout with security forces. Yaya Dillo's death comes after the government blamed his party for a deadly attack on the country's security agency, but Mr. Dillo denied this. On Wednesday, heavy gunfire was heard near his party's headquarters in the capital city. The attack on the offices of Chad's internal security agency in the capital in N'Djamena is said to have killed several people, happening just hours after the announcement that the Central African nation will hold its presidential election on May the 6th. The government on Wednesday accused the opposition party, Socialist Party Without Borders, headed by this opposition figure Yaya Dillo, of orchestrating the attack. Mr. Dillo is one of the aspirants hoping to contest in the elections, and he's a vocal opponent of his cousin who happens to be the president, Mahamat Debi Itno. Well, the transitional president will be contesting as well. He came into power after his father, Idris Debi Itno, was killed while fighting rebels in 2021. Senegal's President Macky Sall has confirmed that he will leave office when his term expires on April 2nd. Well, for those who may be skeptical about the president standing down, he says his decision is firm. President Sall explains that a national dialogue has called for the election to be held on June 2nd. Now, the date has not been confirmed, and it is not clear who will lead the country after President Sall is gone from office. Mr. Sall's previous attempt to delay the February slated elections to December was met with violent protest across the country. The courts had to step in, the Constitutional Court, ruling that the delay is unconstitutional and ordered that the elections be held as soon as possible. In the meantime, the cabinet of Senegal has approved an amnesty law proposed by the president during the inauguration of the national dialogue. To Guinea now, the trade unions have called off a nationwide protest after the government fulfilled one of their key demands, and that is releasing the detained press union leader Sekou Jamal Pendessa. The government jailed Mr. Pendessa last month after he protested against restrictions imposed by the ruling military junta, including internet limitations and the blocking of radio and TV channels. The country's union umbrella group, the Guinean Trade Union Movement, is now set to resume negotiations over its remaining demands with the transitional government. Now, these new developments come in the wake of the country having a new prime minister, Mamadou Ba. After he was sworn in, Mr. Ba asked the unions to suspend their strike, promising to address their concerns. The unions are demanding the reduction of food prices amid the ongoing high cost of living crisis, as well as the end of restrictions in the country. The United Nations mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, known as MONUSCO, has begun its withdrawal from the country, especially with the official handover of the first of its bases in South Kivu to the Congolese authorities. Now, speaking to reporters, UN spokesperson Stephen Dujarric says the base was established in Kamanyola in 2005 and will now be managed by the Congolese National Police. The MONUSCO withdrawal called for by Kinshasa last year comes after 25 years of presence. It was formalized in December by the UN Security Council despite its concerns over the escalation of violence in the eastern Congo region. Congolese authorities had deemed the forces' operations as ineffective.
Democratic Republic of the Congo, the UN peacekeeping mission in that country has handed over a first base to the government as part of its disengagement plan from South Kivu. The base was established in Kamanyola in 2005 and will now be managed by the Congolese National Police. The head of our peacekeeping mission, Bintou Keita, praised the commitment and work of the Pakistani peacekeepers who for 19 years have worked to protect civilians in coordination with the National Defense and Security Forces. In Kamanyola, the peacekeepers have supported the establishment of local protection committees, bringing together communities working alongside the local authorities on issues of security and protection of civilians. A community early warning system is also now in place there. And as we mentioned in the past, the joint memorandum signed in November last year by the Congolese government and the UN peacekeeping mission identified South Kivu as the first province from which it is to withdraw as part of an orderly, responsible and phased withdrawal from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
The International Criminal Court has granted reparations of more than $56 million to thousands of victims of Dominic Ongwen, a convicted commander in the Ugandan rebel group, the Lord's Resistance Army. An ICC appeals panel also upheld his convictions and a 25-year sentence. Mr. Ongwen was not in court for the reparations hearing. He was convicted in late 2022 of 61 offenses that includes murders, rape, forced marriages, and recruiting child soldiers between 2002 and 2005. All the victims covered by Wednesday's order, numbering almost 50,000, include former child soldiers and children born as a result of rapes and forced pregnancies. The presiding judge, Bertram Schmidt, rules that since Mr. Ongwen is indigent, the reparations will be paid by a trust fund for victims set up by the court's member states. And victims will receive $812 each as a symbolic award, while reparations will be paid in the form of community-based rehabilitation programs. Well, for more perspective on this, we're now being joined by VOA's reporter in Kampala, Halima Atumani. Hello, Halima. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, my first question to you will be, how are the victims and people generally feeling about this judgment in Uganda?
I mean, when you hear $52 million, or $56 million, that is a lot of money. But considering the method that is being used, it's a community-based reparation program, and definitely means a whole community of about 50,000 people receiving what you just mentioned, about $800. So for many of these families, this is very, very little money. I think one victim said it's a drop in the ocean. Some said, I've lost my limbs, I've lost my legs. This money will do nothing for me. People lost almost all of their families. Some people do not even know up to now where their families, even though it's been decades later that we see when this war happened. So the victims are not happy at all. Many thought they would get money. One victim said he hoped maybe 10 million shillings would make sense for him, Ugandan shillings, but not 3 million Ugandan shillings or $800.
That was one of my questions to you, as somebody who stays in Uganda, how significant the amount, $812 is, but, from your response, it's not something that would help, especially the victims who you've mentioned lost their limbs and had a whole lot of things to deal with during that period. But let's move on to you giving us a bit of a perspective about the nature of the war in which these atrocities occurred. I mean, this happened years ago.
Yes, the LRA war literally began as soon as when President Museveni came into power. 1 year later, that is around 1987. President Museveni has been in power since 1986. So the LRA came up for them. They wanted to take over and rule the government on the 10 biblical commandments. That was their basis. And the nature of this war was so horrible. It was mainly people from the same tribe coming up and saying, we want to, to rebel against the government. What did they do? They went into their own communities, got people who they used to fight, to kill family members. The atrocities were enormous and very, very heinous, You imagine being raped in front of your son, being raped in front of your husband. And sometimes these rapes were not just, a man raping a woman. It was maybe them using sticks, them using all kinds of things, inserting them into these women. It was really a horrible thing. Of course, women were taken as sex slaves. Children were abducted. Children were, from a young age. And let's not forget, this is how Dominic Ongwen actually joined the LRA. He was abducted as a child and joined the ranks and eventually grew to become a brigadier general in the LRA structure. So it was a war that happened in northern Uganda. And I'm telling you, 20, 25 years later, if you go to northern Uganda, you can still see the effects of this war. The lives of these people, it is still the same. People are still crying. People are still in that, poverty-stricken conditions. The homes they live in, there's really nothing much to it. Of course, they've tried to come up, they've tried to rebuild their lives, but it is difficult for you to rebuild life when knowing that, half of your family is in a mass grave somewhere. This was the nature of this war. It was a very heinous war with all kinds of heinous acts that were perpetrated during the 20 years when this war took place between 1987 to about 2000.
Indeed, and one can only imagine, the terrible nature of these times when all of this was happening. I'm curious as to, Dominic Ongwen. We are seeing, is he the only one being accused of these heinous crimes? Were there no lieutenants of ranks or perhaps henchmen, that are also being charged for these crimes?
Well, where the LRA was structured, it was mainly the top leader, who is Joseph Kony, whose whereabouts until now are unknown. We all know the efforts that were done, not just in Uganda, but the international community came in. The U.S. sent soldiers, a very elite trained army to come and try and search for him. They still failed. The Ugandan army went into Sudan, went into DRC, because the way the LRA was operating was that moving between DRC and Sudan and South Sudan. So it was a bit difficult to know exactly where they are. So the leaders, for example, at the top of the LRA leadership were about 6 men. These included, of course, some are deceased. For example, even though they've not been arrested yet, they are not sure if they're still alive. Someone like Okoto Diambo, who was who at the top. Joseph Kony himself was at the top. Of course, there's one person who died. I think that is a Chelam or someone. But and then at the top, that was now top with the 6 leaders, including Dominic Ongwen, and of course, then it went down to the foot soldiers who were going out and perpetrating all these atrocities. So you cannot say that Dominic Ongwen, when he was arrested, there were henchmen or there were lower ranked soldiers that came after him. That is really not known. But the top 6. As we're well aware of, some are dead, some are perceived to be dead because none of them has been arrested aside from Dominic Ongwen at the moment.
All right, then, we'll leave it at that. Halima Otumani, the VOA's reporter in Kampala. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to the program. Business tourism in Africa takes center stage as the Meetings Africa Trade Show celebrates nearly 2 decades of showcasing the continent's business events sector. Meetings Africa is a 2-day trade show held annually, and according to the UN's World Tourism Organization, international tourism will rebound to pre-pandemic levels by 2024. Our correspondent, Innocent Samosa, gives us more in this report.
From state-of-the-art conference centers to to world-class hotels and resorts, African nations are eager to demonstrate their readiness to host conferences, conventions, and other business events.
The reason why we have Meetings Africa is so that together as a continent we can show up as one. So at South African Tourism, we invite buyers from all over the world so they can come and see our global business events products so that as a continent we can grow together. So absolutely Meetings Africa contributes to ensuring that not only does South Africa grow, but the rest of the continent does.
Each year, Meetings Africa features an array of exhibitions, presentations, and networking sessions highlighting the diverse business landscapes and investment opportunities across the continent. Meanwhile, connectivity and collaboration amongst African nations remains a challenge.
Visa has been another one. It's more difficult to get a visa to travel to some of the African countries as opposed to even traveling outside Africa. And this is also at a very interesting stage that we are all, as Africans, are beginning to see that these are necessities that we must put in place. We must overcome these challenges for us to increase trade, to increase travel and tourism development and business within the continent.
I think a lot of collaboration within the region, within the countries, is of major importance. Rather than competing, but to collaborate and look at each country as your own, so that we don't have borders, so to say. But the South African members or family can come to Zimbabwe as part of their family. To have Botswana, I see there is traction in trying to remove the visa modalities out of the way, and to say if you are within the region, you can freely visit the other countries.
As African countries continue to market their business facilities and position themselves as attractive destination for international events, attendees say that Meetings Africa remains a vital platform for driving growth, fostering collaboration in the continent. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Let's talk about the environment. Now, the 6th session of the UN Environment Assembly is underway at the UN Environment Programme headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. As the world's top decision-making body on the environment, UNEA aims to help restore harmony between humanity and nature, also improving the lives of the world's most vulnerable people. Well, the 5-day summit has in focus how multilateralism can help tackle the triple planetary crisis of climate change, now nature and biodiversity loss and pollution and waste. According to the UN, the Assembly is also an opportunity for world governments, civil society groups, the scientific community and private sector to shape global environmental policies. Well, Professor John Oswa is a climate change expert. He joins us now on the program from our Abuja studio. Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the world's top decision-making body on the environment is meeting in Nairobi as we speak. What are the global issues, that should be focused on?
Well, the biggest one is climate change. Everyone in the world today is either feeling the impact of climate change or at least aware that there is something called climate change. It permeates all aspects of our lives. So climate change is a big one. And of course, issue of biodiversity loss. We are losing our ecosystems, our natural habitats at an alarming rate. Unsustainable rate. You look at the Amazon, almost half of the Amazon is gone. You come to even Nigeria here, we've lost 90% of our primary forest since independence, and we're having a net loss every year. You go to the northern part of the country, desertification is ravaging the landscape. 3.5 kilometers every year, we're losing our ground to desertification. So biodiversity loss is a big one. And then the issue of pollution. Globally, we are polluting our environment with carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, all kinds of chemicals. Sometimes you can even see the smog. You cannot function outdoors. So those are big issues that we need to look at this year. And this assembly is focusing on those three issues: climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and the issue of pollution.
I want to pick up on climate change, a deeper look at the human toll of this. And like you've said, this is something that has come to stay. Now, here in our continent in Africa, how can we adapt and live with climate change?
Well, the first thing we need to do is to understand what causes climate change. We're still doing a lot of things that are big contributors to climate change. I always bring it home. I focus on Nigeria. You look at Nigeria, we have 4 things we're still doing that are very harmful when it comes to climate change. First one is generator pollution. Over 80 million generators in Nigeria polluting the environment on any given day. Diesel, petrol generators. We need to switch to renewable energy. You look at our vehicle emissions. A lot of the vehicles on the road do not meet any standard when it comes to emission testing. We need to ramp up our emission testing, reduce the pollution, particulate matter, hydrocarbons being put out into the atmosphere. Then you look at our industrial production, cement factories, industries, they are not meeting emission standards when it comes to pollution. Then, of course, the big one, gas flaring in the Niger Delta. We still have hundreds of gas flares polluting the environment. So these are some of the things that we need to do in order to begin to address climate change. And it's beginning to affect us in myriad ways. And that's something I want to talk about.
All right then, Professor John Oswa, just before I let you go, well, the Assembly has been holding every 2 years. How would you assess, previous decisions made and goals that had been achieved?
The reason that we are focusing on multilateralism now is because we are discovering that when countries take unilateral action, for instance, U.S. Decides to pull out of Paris Agreement, or China decides to do something else, or India says we're not going to decarbonize as quickly because we need to build our economy. Those things have global impact, because when you put out pollution into the atmosphere, there are no national boundaries in the atmosphere. There are no demarcations. All of us feel the impact of climate change. It is manifesting in terms of desertification, species loss. Our lakes and rivers are drying up. It's leading to insecurity because of scarce resources, crop failures, food insecurity because we're getting flooded. You plant, before you harvest, the floods will come, sweep everything away. So we are deciding now that we need to focus on multilateralism. When countries unite and make decisions and begin to implement, we achieve greater success. So that has been the general feeling now, backed up with science. In previous decisions, we've looked at coral reefs, we've looked at preserving the Amazon forest, we've looked at biodiversity, we've looked at the issue of social justice and climate justice. Some of these things you do, how does it impact vulnerable communities? So all those issues are coming to the fore now, and we need to synthesize those things in order to have a clean and sustainable environment.
All right then, so much to discuss on this, but we'll leave it at that. Professor John Oswa, climate change expert, thank you for your insights.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And as we close the program, a shipment of 7,600 metric tons of wheat flour donated by Ukraine to the UN World Food Programme is has arrived in Port Sudan, and this is being loaded onto WFP trucks for emergency food distributions. This in-kind food donation is expected to be a core part of food rations provided to 1 million people in Sudan for about a month. The shipment is part of Ukraine's humanitarian Grain from Ukraine initiative that was launched by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, as the war is raging in Sudan and it's entering its 10th month, WFP is working around the clock to urgently deliver critical food assistance to families in Sudan who are struggling with skyrocketing food insecurity. The German Federal Foreign Office is also in collaboration with the UN and covered the costing of 15 million euros. Now, this includes the transportation costs of the wheat from Ukraine to Sudan and the implementation and distribution within the country. WFP has been warning of a looming hunger catastrophe as the lean season approaches in Sudan if civilians do not receive food assistance. Currently, nearly 18 million people face acute food insecurity in the country. And that's all we have for you on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.